Stone Cold Prose, Building Better Words.
Way back in 2011, the conservative columnist George F. Will published an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, which included these words. Here, however, is how progressivism limits freedom by abolishing the public-private distinction. First, a human right is deemed so personal that government should have no jurisdiction over it. Next, this right breeds another right to the support or approval of others. And finally, those who disapprove of it must be coerced. Now, I do not always see eye to eye with George F. Will on anything. George is a hardcore member of the right-wing intelligentsia and therefore a resident of the ivory tower. The same ivory tower that so many people on the opposite side of the political aisle occupy, but that's neither here nor there. Will was, even in 2011, part of the dying breed of stuffy, old-line conservative thinkers who often sought to put an intellectual gloss over heartless, self-serving governmental policies, something that's frankly unnecessary in the anti-intellectual populist age of Donald Trump. But in this case, Mr. Will was not only correct, he was prescient. He not only nailed the key feature of modern progressivism, he unrolled the blueprint which it used to hijack America and the entire Western world, a hostage crisis that is only just now showing signs of coming to an end. Hi guys, welcome back to Stone Cold Prose, where we build better words, better thoughts, and better men. I'm Miles Watson, novelist and author of such award-winning series as Cage Life, Sinner's Cross, The Chronicles of Magnus, and now, drumroll, Something Evil. I spent 10 years in the criminal justice field and counting, another 12 in Hollywood, and now I break it all down and build it back better. So let's get into this. By returning to Will's brilliant thesis, making a slight adjustment as we go. First, Will talks of the abolition of the public-private distinction, that progressivism seeks to undermine and ultimately destroy the individual human being's right to hold opinions which are contrary to the progressive narrative. Now, to do this, they begin by making an appeal to pity, an argumentum ad misericordiam, is I think how you say it in Latin. This is a fallacy that attempts to persuade an audience by evoking sympathy, compassion, or pity, rather than by using relevant evidence or logical reasoning. This rhetorical tactic shifts focus from the arguments, merits, etc., to personal misfortunes or emotional distress, often distracting from weak arguments or a lack of factual support. They point to a historically marginalized group, right? They recite a tale of woe, which may be entirely factual in its particulars, play the theme from Schindler's List, and say all that we're asking for is tolerance and nothing else. That's the first stage. Stage 2 is governmental protection. Having appealed to our humanity, they then formally ask the government to step in and recognize them as a protected class. It's important to note here that they insist that stage 2 is the final stage of what they want. That if they simply obtain this in government protection, they will stop there, they will push no further, and they will let the matter rest. Of course, this is untrue. All progressive tactics employ some version or other of the wedge issue. The first wave of arguments meant not to achieve the stated goal, but the goal behind the goal, which is to break down resistance to their ultimate agenda by implementing that agenda in stages the mass public will find palatable, also known as boiling the frog, but we'll get into that in a minute. Stage 3 now begins. This is a coordinated, a systematic, and a massive and unrelenting campaign of social propaganda and public pressure, in which they begin to say that mere tolerance of the group and legal protection of the group is no longer enough. The group has a right to your active support, your approval, whether you actually approve or not. When you go to work, when you go to school, when you watch a movie or a video game, You must receive both liminal or subliminal training on things like cultural diversity, racial sensitivity, gender identity, intersectionality, white privilege, stolen land, microaggressions, etc., etc., ad nauseum. You must reshape your attitudes to the more welcoming and accepting of the marginalized group in question. You must repeat these slogans. You must spit back the mantras. You must sign the papers saying you had the training, the implications of which we will get into directly. But of course, stage 3 naturally encounters resistance. Many people do not welcome being told that they have to take cultural diversity training or get fired. Many people resent being told to adopt in the workplace or the school a specific political platform which may directly contradict their own political, religious, or philosophical beliefs. Many people push back on being bullied in order to keep their jobs or their academic standing or their place at the Hollywood feeding trough. They also resent the intrusion of a progressive ideology into popular entertainment, which does not prevent progressive arguments as one side of the issue, but rather presents them as laying claim to all virtue. And this leads us to stage 4, the part where you try to push back on the whole bullshit pile of nonsense and then get called into HR as a consequence. This is the consequence phase, the find out phase. Remember when HR was there to do your onboarding paperwork, to shoot your identification photo, the ugly one, help you with questions about your benefits and stuff like that? No more. HR, Human Resources, is now a soft corporate, rather than a state, version of the secret police in any communist fascist state you care to name. HR now runs investigations, meaning inquisitions, in which you are denied any rights at all, in which HR punish employees for refusing to toe a political line and conform to a societal agenda. HR now polices not only your speech, your social media posts, but your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your clothing, and even items you may have at your desk, such as horrors, an American flag, or a British flag, or a Canadian flag. And you have no right to defend yourself, not even the right to face anonymous accusers. There is no due process. By the time you know you're in trouble, the paperwork terminating you has already been printed in triplicate, and security is already waiting with a cardboard box by your desk. The actual firing ceremony is a mere formality. And of course, part 4 doesn't stop in the workplace. Far from it. In the legislature, you start seeing laws enacted which criminalize what used to be legal expressions of speech and expression. Remember some years ago when hate speech began to make its predictable, extremely scripted rounds in the public discourse? This was a softening up attack on the idea of free speech, which is the right to say ignorant shit that may piss off other people. And it was premeditated and with malice aforethought carried out. They knew exactly what they were doing when they started this hate speech thing, because they knew exactly where they wanted it to lead. It's a process, like paint by the numbers, like cancer. It follows a rigid and predictable course. Look at Canada. Look at the UK. Look at Ireland. Look at Australia. Look at New Zealand. And so much of Western Europe. Look at what they're doing to the very idea of simply disagreeing with their political agenda. Comedians being arrested for making jokes. Old women being arrested for peaceful protests of the actions of a foreign power. Veterans being arrested for flying their colors. Diversity quotas backed up by the full power of the courts and the federal government. 12,500 people in Britain arrested in a single year for making non-threatening social media posts, which is twice the number of people who are arrested for social media posts in communist China, by the way. This is stage 4, and this is the stage we reached, and we're well on the way to seeing through to its horrible end in most Western countries when Trump got reelected in 2024. Now, say what you want about Trump, and I have, and I will again, but there's a reason he won the election, and it has 6 syllables. Progressive is the agenda, whatever. Yeah, some people voted for the Donald because of the economy. But anyone who thinks the culture wars didn't play into this is just kidding themselves. The re-election of Trump, whatever you think of it, it was not an action. It was a cultural reaction. It was 70 plus million people vomiting up decades of political correctness and wokeism that had been forcibly jammed down their throats. If you don't like Trumpism, I understand that. I have concerns and objections about it too. But as the saying goes, when you make reasonable discourse impossible, unreasonable discourse becomes inevitable. Studies of what used to be called shell shock or battle fatigue, which we now call PTSD, proved as long as 100 years ago that one of the principal sources of mental breakdown in the British Army during World War I came not from the horrors of combat by themselves, but from the accumulated frustration of ordinary soldiers being unable to criticize their superiors. Day after day, year after year, of watching inept officers shove frightened boy soldiers into German machine guns, expecting a victorious result, led to enormous anger which could find no expression whatsoever under British military discipline. Eventually, in many men, this led to a mental breakdown. And the same thing happened here in the United States in the election in a different way and on a larger scale. Decades of being told reasonable discourse and disagreement were actionable hate speech led to an explosion of frustration that manifested in Trump. End of story. Now, and as I have noted in previous videos, the left used to be masterful at big tent politics. The Democratic Party in the United States was a coalition that spanned the political spectrum from center-right, the so-called Reagan Democrats, all the way to the extreme left. And its leaders were experts in herding the most fractious of their cats in the same direction, getting hawkish Truman or Reagan Democrats to get along-ish with wobbly centrist Democrats, raging liberals, dogma-spewing democratic socialists, and militant minorities of every race. But at some point or other, these leaders, these Democratic leaders, lost control of their lunatics. And instead of keeping them on the fringes, but still inside the tent, they let them run the circus. The result was the cultural insanity we've seen over the last 25 and particularly the last 10, 12 years, in which behaviors which quite rightly ought to be classified as personality disorders or mental illnesses have not only been normalized, they've been fetishized. And anyone who dares question this madness, even in good faith, even in a qualified and respectful way, is immediately attacked. I referenced earlier the technique of boiling the frog, the slow but steady process by which one party strips another party of its agency without alarming the victim until it's too late. Will's thesis on progressive tactics is very much in the frog boiling vein, in that it allows a pattern designed to present first a dove and then a dagger. Progressives were able to come to a near victory in the culture war by sticking rigidly to this formula, brilliant formula. To recap, first they destroyed the public-private distinction. Then they asked for tolerance. Then they demanded legal protection. Then they demanded your active moral support and participation because silence is violence. A slogan which translates to either publicly agree with me or face consequences. And then they sought to coerce you if you disagreed and destroy you if you couldn't be coerced. So Will might have added another stage: cancellation, destruction. As J.K. Rowling found out when she, an avowed leftist, diverted slightly from the agenda to point out some of the grosser absurdities of the transgender movement, those who deviate from the party line, those who refuse to bend the knee to the message and be coerced, must be dealt with by other means, as Rowling was. They must be either deplatformed and demonetized or otherwise canceled, as Rowling was. Or, failing that, subjected to harassment, terror, and intimidation campaigns designed to silence their voices by any means necessary, as Rowling was, or witness Charlie Kirk as a more extreme example. And it was at some point between stage 4 and this added stage 5 that they finally overplayed their hand and ignored the 47th law of power, which is, in victory, know when to stop. You see, the left did win the culture wars. At least they won what seemed like a decisive battle back in 2015 with the full legalization of gay marriage in the United States. But the relative ease of this victory tempted them to overreach themselves. More and more, the left began to push a radical social agenda. Not merely at the ballot box, where they have every right to push whatever the hell kind of agenda they want, or in the workplace, where it was grossly inappropriate but tolerable, but in schools. More and more, the focus of their social engineering became children. More and more, the tactic of using wedge issues to push a larger agenda became apparent. Whether the agenda was transsexuality, whether it was open borders, whether it was the elimination of private property, whether it was mass immigration from third world countries, in each and every case, the same tactics were employed. First the trickle and then the torrent. But like Hitler in the 1930s, you can only utilize the same play from the same playbook so many times before people finally wise up and start recognizing what's coming before it actually arrives. And when they went after the kids, that was the moment they went too far. That was when the pushback began, not with timidity, but with righteous anger. And the anger is only building, because once you recognize a pattern, you can trace it back to its roots, and your awareness of how often it's been repeated in your own history becomes grossly obvious. You probably know this from your personal relationships. This is why after 10 years of winning all the victories, the progressives are now on their heels. They're still fighting, of course, but they're now fighting off the back foot because they pushed too far. They asked too much. They drove the wedge so deep that, like the dwarves in Moria at Lord of the Rings, they woke something up, something much scarier than they are. I am angry at the progressive left for what they've done to the world in recent years. But I get even angrier when I realize how much we've all, of any political persuasion, been complicit, you, me, everybody, in letting things get this far. We may have turned the corner on the culture wars. We may have won a few seemingly decisive battles of our own, but we didn't pay attention to the handwriting on the wall. We didn't listen to those like George Will, who, whatever our disagreements with them on that or other issues, saw exactly what was happening to our country and tried to warn us, only to be ignored. If the last 25 years have taught me anything, it's that anything is possible, given enough time and a steady, unrelenting effort. This can be taken as words of inspiration or a very stark, very dire warning indeed. And for freedom and common sense and common decency to prevail in the world, for us to live in the constitutional republic our parents willed to us, and not some rainbow-colored internationalist, ultra-authoritarian hellscape, it's necessary for us to participate. And I don't just mean in the political process. I mean in society. I mean in humanity. We can't just throw peanuts from the peanut gallery, bitch from the cheap seats, and do nothing while these sleazy, anti-democratic, intolerant, hateful, insidious bullies impose their twisted view of the world upon us. Nor can we forget that our own side, whatever it is, center or right, is not free from its own authoritarian tendencies, because the tendency of all political movements is toward greater power. Everyone wants your freedom, and the only person standing between it and them is you. Folks, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and remember to check out my books on Amazon under my own name. I never put the link in the description. I drop book reviews every Monday, scripted content every Friday, shorts almost every day, and unscripted rants whenever rage moves me to do so. I will see you next time, and until then, stay cold and stay vigilant.